Hello there, listeners. How's it going? Some of you may recognize me in my dull, monotonic voice from my thankfully acclaimed review of the new Soul Eater anime. And if not, then I suggest you go watch it, the review and the show. However, what I'm here to talk about this time is another one of the many new animes that began airing in Japan this spring, that being the show known as Mnemosyne no Musume Tachi, or Daughters of Mnemosyne. And unfortunately, while Soul Eater was a tasty, sprinkle-topped chiffon cupcake of animated entertainment, Mnemosyne is more like a questionable slice of cheap bread that came out of a fancy toaster, though it would have to be a slice of bread that somehow had nipples on it. So to rephrase that in a way that makes more sense, while there are a lot of criticisms I can level at the show, I cannot fault it for not being aptly named, since Mnemosyne is not only a real word, but in fact the name of the Titaness in Greek mythology who slept with Zeus for 9 consecutive nights, and thus begat the 9 muses, which is appropriate for the show since it's mostly just a rather poorly disguised porn show. And I implore those of you who do not possess the juvenility to spend half the day with your hand down your pants to stay away from it, because I'm going to bring up my angry review stick for this one, so let's get on with it. First of all, I should inform you that I have watched just the first 4 episodes of this show, and do not really intend to watch the rest. And while I know that doesn't sound like much, the episodes of Mnemosyne are all an hour long, like with Hellsing Ultimate. And furthermore, the show is only scheduled to have 6 of them, since it did start out as a light novel rather than a full-fledged manga. So my having seen 2/3 of the show is more than sufficient for this review, trust me. The admittedly decent premise goes that somewhere between reality and not reality there is a big supernatural tree called Yggdrasil, in an obvious reference to Norse mythos, that nobody can see and that constantly sends out lots of shiny little spore thingies that mostly just float around harmlessly, except that every 1 in a million or so of these spores is special. And if it touches a human being who is female, that female will instantly become immortal and can regenerate like Wolverine from X-Men. Well, if that spore touches a guy, that guy turns into a winged monster thing called an angel, who are really powerful but only live for about a month. One of the problems with this, though, is that they don't really go anywhere with it, and the only plot device that was given about it is that when the immortal women get near the angels, their spider senses start tingling. And by that I mean they get uncontrollably horny and want to go procreate with the angels, who, in the meantime, eat them alive like a big skank sandwich. This pretty much embodies the whole show, as most everything in it is a shallow excuse to cut to a sex scene. The main characters are, as expected, one of these immortal women whose name is Rin and runs on some kind of odd-job detective agency, which of course only deals in supernatural conspiracies, along with her partner, the also immortal, barely pubescent Mimi, who is some kind of hacker as well as being stuck being about 13 for the rest of forever. Now, in order for me to describe the central character Rin as easily as possible, remember the main character lady from Ghost in the Shell, Major What's-Her-Tits? Alright, now imagine that character. Now throw on a pair of glasses, grow out her hair, and recolor everything but her skin dark green. There, you're done. That's it. Oh, and while you're at it, subtract a large amount of suspense, intellectual discussion, and plot writing ability, and replace them with sleazy internet pop-up ads and torturous violence. Because the only other thing dominant in the show besides genitalia groping is a substantial amount of snuff film-like grotesque imagery. Since Rin Tin Tin here possesses the aforementioned immortality and cannot be killed, the show's villains constantly come up with more and more horrible ways to fondle and or torture her, with the apparent goal of making Mortal Kombat look conservative. While this is probably supposed to be dramatic and gritty, the card is overplayed so much that you actually get desensitized from it all fairly fast, since no matter how grossly mutilated Rin becomes, within minutes later she gets back up and shrugs it off like she just stubbed her toe. Now, before those of you with holes in your pockets go and brush me off as some uptight, crotchety old early 20s geezer trying to go upside your head with a Bible, just let me state for the record that 1. I am not religious and have held these ideals since I was about 16. 2. Shut the hell up. 3. Get off my lawn. And 4. While I have multiple times in the past tolerated and even enjoyed shows with excessive amounts of fan service because they had other redeeming qualities that made them worth watching, this is not one of those shows. Now, yes, I have been harping on the porn a lot, and no, I'm still not done yet. But even with my moral objections completely aside, this show is still laden with other shortcomings for me to point out. The music is technically present but hardly emphasized nor interesting, and the same can be said for the handful of action scenes, which is bad for something that's supposed to be an action show, though they may have meant the other kind of action. The voice acting is decent enough, though I can only imagine how dirty all but one of the female seiyus feel after doing all that moaning. The animation quality is very average, and there is very little in the way of actual character depth or development, as the two main characters remain very flat and static, and pretty much the only time either of them significantly emote is hollering in agony or nookie noise. And yes, I said either of them, meaning the show teeters on the brink of pedophilia. Now, if you wanted me to throw the show a compliment just to be fair, I'd say that the setting of the show starting in the early 90s and being a few years farther ahead each episode, having last left off around 2025, is an interesting concept. But that's all you're going to get out of me. Because just like the show's premise, they don't really bother to elaborate on the idea much and don't do it justice, which is another example of how weak the writing in the show is. The dialogue is rather shallow, with every episode starting off with Mimi telling Rin that vodka is water in Russian, which is just annoying and uncreative. Though if I were to choose the biggest flaw in the script, it would be the way that Rin and company find everything out about their cases, the pattern of which goes like this. Ahem. First, they get their case, and do a very small amount of investigating on it before getting stuck because they're missing some important piece of information. Second, they contact their special informant who has all the answers, but demands a high price. And by that I mean explicit lesbian acts that the show doesn't hesitate to show you, which causes me to wonder how the hell that lady makes a living since she doesn't have a legitimate job and all she ever asks for are sexual favors. And while Rin and Mimi claim that they hate resorting to it and only do it when they have to, they're really only trying to convince themselves since they seem to go to her every time they lose the TV remote. And third is that later on, around 3/4 of the way through the episode, Rin will all of a sudden, out of nowhere, pop up and magically remember some extremely vital and obvious thing that cracks the case wide open right then and there. And it's not like when, say, Monk gets a hint and remembers something that leads him to a big clue. It's more to the tune of, "Oh yeah, Mimi, I was drinking my coffee this morning and just remembered that thing I always knew that single-handedly solves all our problems, so I guess you didn't have to with and the gerbils, Thousand Island dressing, Dick Cheney. After all, huh?" All this does is prove what I already suspected about the horny little prick who wrote this having never actually spoken to an actual woman before, but also goes to show just how flat-out lazy he is at anything other than coming up with excuses to show gore and eroge, in the hopes that most stereotypical male viewers will be too distracted by it to notice that without them, the show is little more than a big pile of bland and fail. And yes, I said eroge, not hentai, because hentai just means strange or weird and is only perverse in certain context. Its direct relation to getting it on being a misinterpretation spread by many American fans. But anyway, I am not your typical male, I was not taken by these cheap, unimaginative tricks, and I am not amused. Soul Eater is 6 episodes in now, and while that show still gets an affectionate pat on the head from me, this one gets a punch in the face. Bad mangaka. Bad. No Twinkie. Thank you, and good night.